Dave Anderson. I'm a senior policy fellow at the Wisconsin Institute for Public Policy and Service, otherwise known as WIPS.
Hi, Dave. This is Eric Giordano. I'm the executive director of WIPS, and we'd like to introduce our show today, which is called K-12, Kids and Coronavirus. What's the right balance? So we're really looking forward to this episode. We have three terrific guests who are going to be with us presenting perspectives on school reopening in Wisconsin, which is right around the corner. Now, Dave, last week we introduced WIPS Research Partners to our viewers, and would you mind sharing again what WIPS Research Partners is all about?
Absolutely, Eric. WIPS Research Partners addresses community and organizational needs by providing the full spectrum of academic and technical resources of the University of Wisconsin system and actually beyond, using proven research methods and human-centered approaches.
Well, thanks, Dave. And to tie in a little bit to this week's topic, one project that WIPS Research Partners is in the middle of undertaking is a series of focus groups in central Wisconsin with middle school and high school students to get their perspectives about returning to school this fall. So we're asking them what they're feeling about school reopening, whether face-to-face or virtual, and what concerns they have and what they're looking forward to. And we'll be sharing this information with area school districts as they prepare to receive their students in just a few weeks. But Dave, that's just one of our projects. And how could our two loyal viewers get in touch with us if they wanted to learn more about WIPS Research Partners?
Well, Eric, they can always email us with questions or simply share their favorite bald jokes or bald puns with us at info@wips.org. That's info@wips.org. During the live show, viewers can make comments or pose questions to our guests via the Facebook chat section. And speaking of hair jokes, Eric, did I ever tell you about my recent visit to my barber in Madison?
Look, Dave, I'm really sorry to clip you off, especially when there isn't much there to begin with, but I'm afraid we just don't have time to discuss your favorite barber in Madison story this week or listen to your latest Norwegian secessionist propaganda. We have a really substantial issue that we have to get to with some incredible guests. So if you don't mind, why don't we just get right to our introductions?
Well, Eric, if you insist, we'll clip this in the bud right now and we'll shave some for a little later.
You just can't find good help around here anymore.
My thoughts exactly. Hey, and speaking of help, I'd be remiss if we didn't recognize our crack producer, DJ and Chill Hop DJ, and paid loyal viewer Luke Rudolph, who also serves as our token representative of an attractive younger demographic. Thank you, Luke, for all you do to support our show on the back end and produce it as you do. We really appreciate everything you do.
Yeah, well, thank you.
Today's featured topic is K-12, Kids and Coronavirus. What's the right balance? And I'd like to bring our guests into the mix right now. First of all, I'd like to introduce John Ashley. John is the executive director of the Wisconsin Association of School Boards. He began his professional life in finance before moving to educational television, where he was the division administrator for educational services at the Wisconsin Educational Communications Board. He also worked for the University of Wisconsin-Madison Learning Innovations Division. He joined the WASB as executive director in September of 2005 and believes supporting, promoting, and advancing the efforts of public schools is critical to ensuring equitable educational opportunities for all of Wisconsin students. Welcome, John. We're glad to have you here today.
Hey, thanks, guys. Thanks for that nice introduction. I couldn't have said it better myself. Supporting, promoting, advancing education in Wisconsin.
Absolutely.
Nice to be here.
Our next guest is John Bales. Dr. John Bales is the executive director of the Wisconsin Association of School District Administrators, representing Wisconsin's 421 public school superintendents. He previously served as superintendent of the DeForest Area School District and has over 40 years as an education administrator. He has served on many boards, including the Madison Area Technical College District Board, the Dane County Library System Board, the Workforce Development Board of South Central Wisconsin, and the Madison Regional Economic Development Partnership. In 2009, John was selected as Wisconsin's Superintendent of the Year. Welcome, Dr. Bales. Glad to have you in the mix here today.
Thanks, gentlemen. Pleasure to be here, and I really appreciate the opportunity.
And finally, our last guest is Ron Duff Martin. Duff is the president of the Wisconsin Education Association Council, also known as WEAC. He's an Eau Claire social studies teacher who has 20 years of direct classroom experience with students, primarily in 7th and 8th grade, but also in the alternative high school off-campus program. A longtime student council advisor, he has also served as a new teacher and mentor and union leader. He previously served as the WEAC Council Vice President and Secretary Treasurer, and is the past president of the Eau Claire Association of Educators. He's formerly a director of the National Education Association Board. And welcome, Duff Martin.
Thanks. It's great to be here, and I'm just pleased to join John and John.
Well, we're glad to have all three of you here. You know, I'm gonna jump right in with the first question. For starters, approximately what percentage of our school districts are planning some sort of face-to-face reopening this school year? John Ashley, do you want to maybe take that first?
Dave, it's a great question. It's difficult to answer because I can tell you right now, it's a work in progress. As we learn more about this virus, districts are having to make some decisions. But right now, I couldn't tell you from a statewide perspective which percentage of our districts would be opening in person versus a virtual classroom versus a hybrid. Things are just moving very, very quickly, and it's going to really depend on how this virus spreads around our state. So I can't say that there's a percentage that I could give you.
I can add to that, Dave. Our organization surveyed superintendents about 3 weeks ago now. At that time, as you might predict, there was sort of a split between the three options that guidance had offered to people in terms of virtual, in-person, or some sort of hybrid. Probably a third and a third and a third at that point, with a growing interest in person. It was always contextual depending on a district's circumstance in terms of the virus and the spread. I will say those last 3 weeks, we know those numbers are no longer valid. There's been a significant uptick in the number of districts switching to a virtual only option, largely owing to the spread that we're seeing across the state with the virus. So we are resurveying that coming up. The Department of Instruction is going to do that. So we'll have a better feel here. But honestly, I think things will continue to change over the course of the next 4 weeks because it's so unpredictable with the spread.
Duff, are you hearing from your members across the state and what's going on in their respective districts? I know you've got a lot of members out there.
Yeah, absolutely. And John are both absolutely right. It's just changing. It's evolving. We're hearing from one local that they're saying, oh, we're going 100% in person. And then we hear, oh, it's hybrid. And now they're going virtual. And so our main goal is we're not collecting any sort of data. We're just, as local presidents let us know what they're doing, we're just offering the kind of support. What can we do to help you in the situation that your district has chosen?
You know, as a follow-up to that, I'd like to ask each of you to maybe paint a picture for us of what you're hearing from the school board officials, school administrators, and the teachers that you represent regarding school starting this fall. Are your members divided on the issues? Are you seeing some common ground? Are there some trends developing? I'd be interested to hear from each of you as to what you're hearing from your members. John, Ashley?
Okay. I think the tough issue all my members face is how to return to school safely. I know my members place health and safety at the top of their priority list, and that's the common ground. I think another area of common ground is that my members have appreciated the guidance and advice that the Wisconsin Association of School Boards has been providing them through our responses to our members' questions and concerns, our online resource pages, regular email updates, and frequent webinars. About the only thing certain about this virus is that it has created uncertainty. My members have taken on the challenge of working their way through the messiness of uncertainty and the many difficult decisions that surround planning for a safe return to school amid that uncertainty. Many parents, families, community members are just seeking a return to normal, whatever that looks like in the middle of a pandemic. And many communities are divided on what is the best way forward. And those divisions have created challenges for my members. That being said, our members are united that they want to provide high quality education for students and staff in a safe and healthy environment. The look of that may change from community to community, from school to school, even within a community, and may vary over time as the course of the virus changes. If I had to sum up what I'm hearing, one thing would be frustration about dealing with the uncertainty of this unprecedented situation, yet a desire to work with their community, local public health officials, and staff to make the best decisions to provide high quality education for students. School boards and administrators have made tremendous efforts to develop a range of return to school options and to survey parents, staff, and communities about those reopening options. In almost no instance have those options been universally popular with parents or staff or their communities. And due to both uncertainty about how the virus will behave and whether communities will accept and support their decisions, many of these decisions are having to be revisited or reworked.
Great, thank you.
I think, Dave, I'd probably just change the semantics a little bit. I don't see superintendents necessarily divided on the issue, but because there's no statewide plan, we opted not to have a uniform strategy across the state. So you're really looking at 421 districts responding in their own way within their own context. And so there's certainly differences in how they're approaching it. What we see is the close relationship between the superintendent, the public health official, in working through their local circumstances, thinking about the realities of what their context looks like with their buildings, what's possible, what's happening from the health side of the equation. And so you do see a lot of difference amongst them, and that's why you see this diversity in plans based on what the pandemic looks like in the various places across the state. What I do think they're all focused on is more uniform, and that is how do we re-engage students in a meaningful way on instruction? That is at the core of what educators are interested in. And they're just trying to balance that with the reality of the pandemic, and how do we do that for students and staff, frankly, the students' families and the community at large, safely. And I don't think it's lost on any superintendent about the nexus between schools and the economy. So you're factoring in all of those things, trying to make the best decision in your context. So you'll see things unfold very differently. And as it's been said earlier, I think, frankly, because of that, you'll see things continue to shift between now and the school opening. But I think what's important for people to know, doing that based on best guidance and information they have about all those factors and how they balance one another.
Thank you.
I would say individually, we have members who are really conflicted individually. They're really conflicted because there isn't an educator that I haven't talked to that doesn't want to be back to school face to face. They want to be in their classrooms. They want to be with the kids that they teach. They want to be with their colleagues. They're missing that. And they know that the virtual or distance learning or alternative learning is difficult. It's hard. And they know that what happened in March, we didn't get any kind of warning for that. And so we did the best that we could to provide the best that we could in such a short amount of time, that they know they can do better, but it's just, they're so worried that they're going to miss a child here or there. And to an educator, that's just devastating. And so they're conflicted internally. Like, I really want to be back at school, but I'm also really concerned about health and safety. And from WEAC's perspective, we really believe that it's a local decision, absent any state giving any kind of mandate for the entire state. It's a local decision, and we're going to support that decision if it's based on the health and safety of the students and staff both. And so that does offer a little bit of a conflict, because we have teachers who live in one district and teach in another. And so this district, their kids are going to be staying home because they've opted virtual, but they have to go teach. So they're much like a lot of the other employees out there I've got to manage my kids at home and I've got to teach virtually as well.
Yeah.
So it's just a huge challenge all the way around. But I've really appreciated, and just the opportunity to be with John and John here on this panel shows that we really have to collaborate. We have to work together, and we have to put at the center of any decision we make, the child, their health, their safety, and the best possible education that we can deliver.
Oh, I really appreciate those responses, and you've really kind of set the table with a lot of the topics we wanted to cover. And Dave, with your permission, I'm going to jump ahead a little bit in our script, because
Sure.
two of you at least, maybe all of you, mentioned guidance that you are giving to your respective members, even if it's not necessarily uniform. Well, that's really my question. Are your organizations making some common recommendations and sharing guidelines with your respective members regarding school opening in the COVID environment? And if so, what are they, and how did you decide on these guidelines? Maybe we can start with Duff this time and go backwards.
Sure, we're providing the normal kinds of things a union would provide their members, with guidance on how to deal with particular issues, situations. But I think the beauty of what DPI has done, along with the Department of Health Services, bringing us all together. So every Monday we get the opportunity to meet together as a group, and there's been a lot of conversation, a lot of input from everybody on the kinds of guidance and things that should be delivered to our respective groups, but to our school districts as well. And that's been really beneficial when our educators know they're getting the same information that perhaps the school boards or the school administrators are getting. And so we're really sticking to the guidance that DPI has provided, as well as the Department of Health Services.
Thanks. John Bales?
Well, I would just at two levels, really, Eric. We're intimately involved with personnel at DHS and DPI in helping shape that guidance. Our perspective is obviously trying to make sure that guidance is practical for the consumer, that they can actually implement the guidance. As you know, the best practice in some of the things we've seen from the CDC and from DHS often creates incompatibilities with what districts are trying to do operationally. And so how do you navigate those? And what we've been specifically then, once that guidance comes out, we typically try to engage with all of the superintendents, with the professionals, with the experts, so that they can have an exchange with them and kind of understand the implications and the nuances of that. It's interesting in the state because you have DHS really offering guidance, typically aligned closely with the CDC, but you also have public health officials in each county and in some cases municipalities. So our specific guidance to superintendents really is at multi-layers. First, to make sure that they are in continuous conversation with their public health official, so that they can take advantage of that expertise to think about how to best apply the mitigation expectations within their own system. And secondly, we strongly advise that they work with their insurance providers because there is a legal aspect to this, and make sure that one of the superintendent's jobs really is to protect the assets of the system and protect the assets of the taxpayers. So making sure that they are doing things in a way that protects those issues in the system. Then, frankly, we advise them to use their district council, their attorneys at the front end of planning, to think proactively about how to best serve the students, families, and their staff, but also to do things in alignment with what the expectations would be legally. Next would be to keep in strong alignment with their board. At times when communities are conflicted, there's a lot of diversity of public opinion. It's critical that the governance and administrative elements of the district are in perfect alignment, and that they together are deciding what direction they're going based on principles, and that they can express those principles to the community. Not just say, here's what our decisions are, but here's why. Here's how we're viewing things and how we're prioritizing. It's critical that that relationship be very tight. And then the last guidance is to make sure you're communicating consistently with the community and internal to the district. As Duff said, high anxiety times, legitimate concerns on people's part, making sure that you're communicating with them, listening to them, engaging them in the conversations so that everybody is invested in whatever plan you're going to come up with. It'll be a collective effort. So, and those guidances, by the way, continue. EPI put out some guidance just today around some flexibilities for obviously school, no matter how you do it, isn't going to be business as usual. So we need some flexibilities from the typical regulatory environment. We'll be looking probably for some statutory relief on some things. DHS is about to come out with another tool that's helpful to districts in terms of how to inform their decisions as they shift between virtual or hybrid or in person, using some metrics. So that the agencies are continuing to give useful information and tools to superintendents and their boards as they sort of navigate this. So,
Okay, thank you, John Bales. And John Ashley.
Yeah, I would agree with what John just said, and Duff. I think it's incredibly important for our communities to understand that the responsibilities for managing a district in the middle of a pandemic takes on lots of additional issues that need to be considered. And certainly we're informing our members as school board members. They're part of a management team with the superintendent. They have a responsibility to work with their staffs, but at the end of the day, they need to contact their insurance carriers. They need to make sure they're talking to their legal counsel. And as John pointed out, a board's role is to be that nexus within the community so that the community understands what's happening in the district and why. As locally elected officials, board members have an extra burden in that it's not possible for them to hide from their responsibilities. They're going to run into their constituents throughout the community, and the community legitimately is going to want to know, well, why is the district doing A and not B? And so that communication between the leadership, the management team, where you have the board, which sets the policies up for a district, working with the superintendent and their staff, that's incredibly important, particularly now. We're asking our members to work collaboratively with their superintendent and with their staffs. And we've been fortunate in Wisconsin. I would agree with Duff and John that the Department of Public Instruction, DHS, have pulled us to the table. We've been there. We've made our concerns known to them. We've tried to give as much feedback as possible, and we're looking for more assistance as we go forward. And I'm, as Duff mentioned, interested in the metrics, the tools that will be provided to districts so that we have a standard on reopening schools. Because as you travel around the state of Wisconsin, you're going to see varying degrees of the virus. And so you're going to see on the ground different results for those communities. And we want our members as school boards, their job is to support the quality education of their students, and they can do that only through working with their superintendent and with their staffs and administration. But there's a critical role right now because our state is having a discussion, like the whole country is, about what's the best way forward. And we just want board members to be seen as an honest broker of information from the Department of Public Instruction, DHS, their districts, so that the parents in their communities have a sense of trust that whatever is going to be decided, it's in the best interest of the safety of the communities, where you start with the focus on your students and your staff, and then the community at large.
Thanks. Thank you all. Yeah, go ahead.
It's really clear listening to all three of you that this whole issue of going back to school and the guidance that's offered is really complex and at a lot of different levels. I'd like to zero in on just kind of one aspect of this, and that's the classroom itself. You know, under normal circumstances with 25 to 30 kids in the classroom, it seems like classroom space just really doesn't allow a lot for the recommended physical distancing. I'm wondering what schools are planning, the schools that are planning to reopen and bring kids back are looking at doing about physical distancing in the classroom itself. Do the three of you have some perspective on that?
well, I can respond, David. Here again, you'll see differences depending on the context and literally the building structure that districts have. So in some Smaller systems, lower enrollment, a little bit easier to socially distance kids perhaps in classrooms where you didn't have that large a class number to begin with. You'll see places that are putting secondary students, for example, on virtual and then spreading younger children out throughout all the buildings, elementary buildings, middle and high, where they can have more distancing and smaller cohorts of students. You'll have some districts that are alternating schedules. So you're bringing in only half the students at a time. So you can separate them that way. So you'll see a different look in systems, some of that literally tied to what sort of physical structures they have. Often they're also looking at parental choice to the extent they can. If people would prefer to be on virtual, as Duff said with staff, it's legitimate to be anxious about this, and you're going to have families who don't and won't send their children. So how can you still equitably try to provide a decent program for those students? So there's ways to do it, but you're correct in that that's what poses the complexity. On the one hand, the guidance is 6 feet. On the other hand, from a practical standpoint, let's just use transportation as an example. I know people have a lot of interest in busing kids. You can't have 6 feet between kids and still run the same bus routes and get everybody to school. So nor do you have a way to get 3 times as many buses or run 3 or 4 routes in a day. So if you're going to socially distance, you're going to change the way you program students. So lots of implications in trying to meet the mitigation guidelines that we've been given.
And for me and for the educators that I talk to and as they gear up and plan for whatever situation it is that their district has opted to do, they know that their classroom, if it's face-to-face, is going to be different. It's going to look different. It's going to feel different. And psychologically, our educators are having to really deal with that, because it's not necessarily going to be the kind of environment that they were used to, where they could have kids in small groups and be moving around and playing educational games and all that other stuff. That they created that unsterile environment, kind of perhaps maybe some of us remember when we were in elementary, the rows and the, very sterile, very, like we got to play the rules here and make sure we do this right, that some of our teachers are going to have to give up a little of that. And the other is the spending the time to teach kids how to social distance, how to wear their masks, make sure they wash their hands. Those are all things that have to be incorporated into what the classroom will look like. So it's going to be very different. And for the most part, educators that I talk to that are going back in face-to-face instruction, they're ready for that. Their anxiety is on the workload, because if they have half their kids virtual, half their kids face-to-face, or if they have kids A and B and some virtual, it's just going to take a lot of extra prep time. But if it means everyone's going to be safe and we're going to have an environment where we can mitigate and get control of COVID, our educators are up for it.
Yeah, I would agree with Duff. It's likely that we're going to need additional teachers and staff and additional bus routes and buses and drivers and additional maintenance staff, enhanced cleaning and sanitation procedures, improvements to our HVAC system so they can filter out tiny particles like the viruses, and increased costs for supplies such as masks, gloves, and thermometers. So all of these changes add costs to the school district's operations. And I guess my concern is that districts may or may not be able to bear those costs. So one of the real issues facing us as a state is getting the resources to do the necessary improvements to be able to provide a safe learning environment for our students. And we also have to understand that even if we have students who are able to come back into the building, there are going to be some students with underlying health conditions where it's not going to be safe for them to come back to school. So districts are going to have to provide some virtual education to those students. And there may be other students who have family members that we need to be thinking about in terms of protecting them. So the responsibility of our districts to be able to do in person, but also acknowledging that at any moment, the situation could change and they would be reverting to a virtual learning environment for their districts. All of that costs money. And I think that that is a big concern of school boards, I'm sure of teachers and superintendents, but we have to be realistic that this is going to cost additional resources.
Yeah, I'd like to come back to that cost issue, but you've raised a really important thing, and I'm going to channel a little bit my higher ed background and experience. But I know in higher ed we're dealing with some of those similar issues, like transitioning from in person to virtual, and frankly, many of our in the higher ed world, I'm assuming in K-12, we don't have that experience, right? We've never had to do that before, and suddenly we're being asked to do it all. And what I wonder is, do our schools have the adequate training? Do the teachers have the training? Do they have the capacity to change that pedagogy? And not just, we don't even know what the pedagogy has to be, since it could go either way, or it could be a hybrid, and decisions are still being made. So how do you think we're effectively dealing with providing the support to teachers? And John Ashley, from your perspective, are boards sensitive to these kind of questions when they're making decisions about how to go back to school in the fall?
Oh, absolutely. I think that last spring, when this all began, we had to abruptly shift to virtual learning. And I just want to say publicly, I'm amazingly surprised and proud of the efforts of our board, superintendents, and most importantly, teachers, who turned on a dime to provide education to our students. It wasn't perfect. I think that we understood this was a new way of teaching, but I really think we have to acknowledge the hard work that went into making that shift. And as much as I would like for our students to be in classrooms, I think we all do, there's no debate about it, that's where we want our kids to be. The fact of the matter is, for some of our students, that's not going to be a safe environment. And so we have to learn from our experiences last spring. And I'm of the belief that the education that will be delivered will be better. I think we've had several months to learn from those experiences. Was it perfect? No. But I think going forward, boards understand that this new version of education, whether it's a hybrid, virtual, or in person, is going to look different, and that we are going to build that delivery of education based on the experiences and the lessons learned from last spring.
Yeah, I'd like to hear Duff and John Bales, your perspective from teachers and administrators on this question.
Sure. For educators, we've stepped up our game as a statewide organization in providing opportunities and experiences through webinars or certain sorts of training, where we're bringing in experts to talk about virtual learning versus the face-to-face instruction, and how that's different, and what have we learned, and what are some real success stories out there, because they are out there, as John Ashley alluded to. Is that, and I'm impressed with what we did in such a short amount of time. And we can build off of that, and we have to build off of that, because we know that some of our most vulnerable students did not fare very well during the spring close down, particularly our kids of color, some of our impoverished kids that live in poverty, because they just didn't have access to the kind of virtual or internet. And so those are the things that we learned. And by taking what we learned and trying to make it better for this round, as John said, I think we're going to do a really fantastic job. It won't be perfect, and we're going to continue to learn, but we're offering every Wednesday an opportunity for our members to meet with experts to talk about virtual learning and how we do it. I mean, there are so many stories from what happened in the spring, because not everything was virtual learning. I know of a special ed teacher here in Madison who actually taught from the sidewalk. She took a great big giant dry erase board, and she took sidewalk chalk, and the little kids were looking out the window, and she taught. And just amazing. Another teacher up in a very rural school district, Iola, Scandinavia, a kindergarten teacher who every week put together a nice packet for her kindergartners. She has 18 kindergartners, and then she'd go take it down to the post office, and she'd mail them each the packet every week with new books, some new learning materials. And then she spent time calling each of the families and the kids. Can I help you? Talk to the kid. Did you understand? Tell me about what you read. So we have so many fantastic things that are going on, and we have to capture those, because our public schools really are just doing just a fantastic job with, and as John said, we also need the resources. We need everything's going to cost. So.
Yeah, I would agree with what John and Duff said. I think, perspectives of the superintendents, most of our teachers in this state are extremely well-trained. And when they come through our programs, certainly there are places that you can't prepare or for the reality of the classroom necessarily in the university setting. And so a lot of that happens on site. I think it's fair to say most of our teachers are quite adept at delivering online learning or using technology to reinforce students' individual pursuits. That's quite different than trying to deliver all of school virtually. And really was remarkable at the speed at which and the effectiveness by which they could do that last year. Is it perfect? Not by any stretch. I think that we have learned a lot. I think, as Duff said, there are, in his example, lots of opportunities. We've really stepped up professional development opportunities for teachers. Good many things coming through the department. I don't know if people know that the federal money that came through the Department of Instruction, as well as the money that came through the governor's office, largely directed towards trying to support that development in teachers, because again, we're trying to deliver the entire experience of schooling, unlike just simply doing some online learning experiences. It, frankly, though, exposed, I think, the inequities across our state relative to technology, whether it's access to the internet, and estimates are anywhere between 15 to 20% of the students and families struggle with one or the other of those features. We don't really have a statewide response for that either, nor do the federal Congress. So I think those are things that we need to address moving forward. As was referenced within individual districts, unanticipated monies expended on equipment, trying to get everybody the devices they need for virtual. We've still got to be prepared for that this year, because odds are we'll be moving in and out of virtual and in-person instruction throughout the year. And likewise, how do we get connectivity to people? So lots of things to do from infrastructure standpoint, lots of initiatives to try to support and build capacity among our staff to deliver online, but it's a significant task. I think parents, you hear all the stories of parents. I think they found out that delivering instruction virtually is a challenge. Playing teacher, so to speak, is a challenge. And if nothing else, I believe what we've learned out of this is online education, virtual, if you want to call it that, certainly has value, but there is no replacement for a quality teacher with kids in the classroom in schools. I think everyone now recognizes that, and quite frankly, recognizes the value that schools are to a community at large. So some things have been, I think, of a benefit here, I think, to people's understanding about what it takes to instruct children.
John, I just have to share one brief story to that. Boyceville, Wisconsin, second grade teacher. She said, I connected with all my kids. I called them, but I just want to hug them. Yep. I just want to give them a hug. And you can't do that virtually. You can't do that distance. That's what's going through many of our educators' minds. Now, I, as an 8th grade teacher, I didn't want to hug any of them, but she's a 2nd grade teacher. She did.
Okay. Well, I like, thanks for sharing that, Duff. I wanted to follow up on what John said. And I think that one of the things that we saw with the pandemic is the disparities in our state about the availability of resources, not just broadband in some of our rural areas, but in some of our urban areas as well. This is not new information, but I think that it became very crystal clear that we have disparities in the resources that have been allocated for education in our state. And so a takeaway, I think, for the state of Wisconsin is that we have to do better. We have to put resources to where they're needed. And a concern that I have is around childcare, because I think that unless we have adequate childcare in a state where we have childcare deserts, it's going to be almost impossible to get back our teachers who they need for their kids to be in good quality daycare as well. But for our businesses, because we recognize, and I know boards, superintendents, and teachers recognize that we're part of the economic engine of the state, and it's not going to recover unless we have adequate childcare. And I think that that's another area that the pandemic has made very clear. It didn't create the problem, but it really showed the shortage of childcare. And because of the pandemic, we've seen a number of childcare providers close down. And we don't think they're coming back. So that's another concern that I would share.
So now that a lot of these gaps have kind of come to light as a result of the pandemic, do you think policymakers in Madison and Washington are starting to pay more attention to what the needs are to provide the funding to address some of these gaps and to really address whether it's safety in the classroom or access to technology? I mean, again, you can go right across the board. Are people starting to pay attention, do you think?
Well, that's the $64,000 question, and that really showing my age. And so for this old bald guy here, you probably know what I'm talking about. But for our younger viewers, they may want to ask an older person. But I'm really concerned that the message has not been received, not at the national level and all the way back down. And I think that we have a responsibility as school board members, as elected officials, to make the case to our communities that there is no better investment than the return on investment you receive when you put those monies and resources into education. And so to answer the question, no, I don't believe that the seriousness of the need has been understood.
I will say I agree with John. I do think there's a heightened awareness of policymakers, both at state and federal levels, of the critical value of schools, of what it takes to actually operate them, in this case, both instructionally and safely. Whether or not that makes a difference going forward in terms of policy, I think depends upon whether the general public, who also recognizes those things now, holds them accountable for that. I think, in fairness, speaking for superintendents, I'd be remiss if I didn't say it's been true for some time that both at the federal level and the state level, we have not resourced public education at a level that would be necessary, given the scope of the social institution and enterprise that it is. The significance of public education on aspects of life within a community, whether it's social structures, its economy, its quality of life. I think everyone sees that now. And you can't short that if you really want that institution to realize the potential that it has. And I know that sounds a little esoteric, but I think we have grossly, frankly, underfunded this institution for a long time. And the effects of that are being felt now very clearly. So whether or not we do something depends on whether collectively we all ask and expect more from our policymakers about it. And I'm not discounting the fact that, look, the economy is in trouble. There's not a limitless amount of money, but allocating money and setting budgets is about priorities. And so I think you have to match what you know to be important with where you put your resources. So we're certainly hopeful that this experience, as traumatic as it's been, maybe changes the trajectory of how we've dealt with our public school institutions.
I absolutely and 100% agree with both Johns. And then, some people say, wow, WEAC and WASDA and WASB, we're all on the same page here. And we are. We absolutely are, because we care about our kids. We care about our communities. We care about the employees, the people that work in our public schools, because we know that in many places, our public schools are what makes that community. I grew up in a very small town up in northern Wisconsin. My K-12 school, it was the center of everything that happened in Minong, Wisconsin. It was the center of everything. And my only message is politicians have to stop playing games and quit politicizing what's important to every single one of the kids in this state and every single one of our communities. It's too important. And if we don't get this right now, a lot of our kids are going to miss out.
Yeah, I would certainly agree, Duff. This is so critical for our state. And we're at an inflection point, I think, as a country. We've seen through the summer and the emphasis on racial justice and equity and understanding that everybody in this country ought to have an opportunity for an equal opportunity of success. And we have not succeeded as a country, I think, in delivering that. And public education remains, I think, the one way in which we can ensure that every student can be a success. And so it's worth investing in. There's no question about it.
Yeah, well, wow, this has been a fantastic discussion. Gentlemen, I can't believe it, but we're out of time. I mean, this just really flew by. And as you can see, we didn't even get to a third of the questions that we were wanted to. So I apologize about that. But man, it's been a really great conversation. We appreciate it. Thank you so much, John Ashley,
Thank you.
Dr. John Bales, Duff Martin. We really appreciate the work that you all are doing and the work that the thousands of people, frankly, that you represent are doing to make sure schools are safe and the productive learning environment that you discussed. And you know, like health workers, like, you know, public safety workers, you know, we have to give credit to what are now going to be our frontline teaching and administrative folks who deal with schools. So, and frankly, with board members who have to make tough decisions, right, around these issues. So thank you all.
Thank you.
Once again, our sincere apologies to our friend Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. We couldn't fit you in this morning, but we promised to get you in later. So Dave, why don't you tell us a little bit about next week's show?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm excited about next week's show as well. Which of course will be noon on Friday, August 14th. We're going to have two special guests, one representing the Democratic Party and one representing the Republican Party, talking about the challenges of holding an all virtual national party convention. So I think that's going to be a really interesting topic for our listeners. Yeah, and you know, as long as I've got the microphone here, Eric, I know you've been trying to prevent me from sharing some stories here this morning, but I'm not going to give up the mic right now. I am going to share one story. And I was telling our guest before the show started that I actually started my career in education. I was a high school German teacher in my hometown up in northern Wisconsin. I'm actually from Hazelhurst, but Lakeland High School in Minocqua. And so when I heard the story, it kind of appealed to me as an old German teacher. So did you hear when the coronavirus pandemic started in Europe, the German government instructed its citizens to start stockpiling sausage and cheese? Did you hear that, Eric?
No, I didn't, Dave. Why don't you tell us about it?
It prompted the question by a lot of German citizens to their government: why should we stockpile sausage and cheese? And the official response was, well, we're preparing for the worst case scenario. Get it? Wurst, the German word for sausage, Käse, the German word for cheese. Now, I'm going to give credit where credit is due. John Ashley, your colleague and my longtime friend who I used to work with in the Capitol in Madison, Dan Rossmiller, gave me that joke. So there you go. I just want to provide some credit where credit is due.
And I don't even know, you know, I'll just say this: never respond in the affirmative to any question Dave Anderson has for you. That's the lesson. That's the takeaway. Gentlemen, thanks again. We really appreciate you being here. We'll see you all next week.
Very welcome. Thank you.